So today I'm joined by Sam Warner from Get Your Message Across, and Sam's agreed to speak with me today about menopause and ADHD. So thanks, Sam. Thanks ever so much for taking time out of your busy week to come and chat to little old me. Thanks.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
And before we start, Sam, I think it'd be really useful to learn a little bit about your work, your business, and what you do day to day.
Sure. So I spent 25 years in corporate and realized that there was a bit of a gap in knowledge. So I
Okay.
decided to leave and start my own company, Get Your Message Across, so that I could go into businesses and help them to attract and keep neurodivergent talent. And when I say neurodivergent, I mean people who are autistic, have ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, sensory processing difficulties, all the smorgasbord of lovely neurospiciness. Um, and also helping individuals, so kind of from both sides, both the organization and the individuals. So the individual can ask for reasonable adjustments if necessary so that they can thrive, because sometimes the organization want them to ask and the individual goes, I don't know what I'm allowed to ask for. So there's the kind of the bringing them together, and that's what I do.
Brilliant. Great. Well, that sounds amazing, Sam. But I'm going to talk about you today. So
Yeah,
nobody else. It's just about you.
that's
So
me.
when did you know you had ADHD?
um Probably about, I don't know, about 6 or 7 years ago, and I'm 50. So it's fairly recent. It all started with me discovering that I was autistic when I was 35. And then I kind of went on a bit of a research rampage, and it became more obvious to me that I had both. And that's very common. About a third of autistic people also have ADHD, and that just makes it even harder to diagnose. But
Yeah.
yes.
So for people who don't know about ADHD, firstly, what does it stand for and what does it look like in terms of behavior?
Well, its name's a bit rubbish, really. It's attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So for a start, the word disorder, never like those kind of words.
No, no, no.
And also the hyperactivity thing, or sometimes there's ADD, which doesn't include the hyperactivity.
Mm.
It's it's a collection of traits, characteristics, or symptoms where people deviate from whatever normal is according to the DSM-5, which is a diagnostic book used by psychiatrists.
Right.
And it highlights patterns of behavior mainly, and ways of communicating perhaps, that are quite noticeably different and usually disabling in some way. That's the kind of the key point. Some people say, oh, I'm a little bit ADHD. Well, no, you're not. You're either ADHD or you're not. In that you have ADHD if the things you're experiencing are disabling you on a day-to-day basis.
Could you give us an example or two?
Yeah, so part of my ADHD includes something called pathological demand avoidance. And what that means is it's very difficult for me to submit to demands, requests, orders. I respond a lot better if it's given as a choice or a suggestion,
Oh, okay.
which
Interesting.
some people might say, oh, that's a bit wishy-washy. I just want to tell you what to do. And I'm like, but unfortunately, there's a little person inside my head that just goes, I don't know. I'll give you a small, for instance. When I was younger, I might think, oh, I'll go and hoover the lounge for my mum without being asked, because I know she'll love that. And as I walk towards the hoover, my mum says, oh, can you go and hoover the lounge? Well, I can't now,
Interesting.
because now it's a demand. Not a demand as in you must hoover the lounge, but
Mhm.
that's how it's received by the little person inside my head. So that's
Right.
an example of how that can really hold me back from paying bills, answering phone calls, and doing things that I must do. And in extreme cases, some people actually get in trouble with the law. They get CCJs, they become homeless because they just can't handle these things.
Right.
So that is disabling.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so what sort of impact was that having on your work life? Was there an impact?
Yeah. So I would get feedback like, we love your enthusiasm, but could you be more consistent? And that's another reason why ADHD will often get misdiagnosed as bipolar, because of the swings in emotions, highs and lows,
Yeah.
manic activity, as people might call it, versus very quiet time, which is
Yes.
usually recharging time. Doesn't necessarily mean you're depressed. It can
Yeah.
just mean
Yeah.
that you're being quiet. But the big difference is that bipolar individuals tend to experience a long manic period,
Yes.
sustained over days and weeks,
Mm-hmm.
and then a long down period. Whereas when you have ADHD, you could have that 27 times in one day. Up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down. So that tends to be, I'm not a diagnostician at all, but that tends to be a very clear indicator that it's that one or that one.
That sounds really exhausting, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is. And then on top of that, being told not to be yourself. So you're checking in with yourself constantly, rehearsing what you're saying. Am I being too lively? Am I being too quiet?
Yeah. That's
Yeah, it's really tiring.
hard. So what happened when menopause came into the equation? Do you remember when that was and what happened?
Yeah, that was about 8 years ago. All of a sudden, it's like I just about figured out by then how to control my body and symptoms and things like that. And then suddenly somebody came and turned the dial up and then added a few more things. It's like, hang on a minute. That's not fair. So, because my emotions were bigger, I they wouldn't put me in front of the customer at work because I was too maverick, too much of a risk, because I wasn't, the corporate consistent robot.
Right.
Or I'd have these phases of energy and burst of focus, and I'd do really, really well, and I'd show other people up. And that's not, you mustn't do that at work either. Can't shine. No, got to be consistent. And I'd ask too many questions because I just want to get the job done. I'm not really. I got to that point where I was like, do you know what? I'm not really interested in people. I just want to get the work done.
Yeah. Yeah.
And again, that doesn't work too well when you work with lots of people.
Almost were you almost cutting yourself off as a preservation strategy?
Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
And people seem to be quite happy to allow me to do that. Nobody ever sort of went, oh Sam, oh we really miss you, or even when I left jobs through those years, nobody ever said, what can we do to make you stay? Really interesting. I
Yeah,
didn't feel valued at all.
that's not great. So the menopause threw a few extra symptoms at you. What sort of things were happening during that time?
So a lot of those were physical. So whilst I'd spent all this time mentally handling my symptoms, characteristics, traits, whatever you want to call them, I hadn't had to deal with all the extra physical stuff going on. Things like a nasal drip, which I didn't know was a thing. And constantly having a tissue in my pocket and dabbing my nose. It's like I've got a cold all the time. And your nose gets sore when you dab it all the time. And when you're really sensitive to things, it's painful.
Yeah.
Never mind the hot flashes, the cold feet. I haven't worn a coat in about 5 years, which is ridiculous. But I'm just hot all the time, except my feet are like ice.
Yeah.
It doesn't
Yeah.
make any sense. Incontinence, you get to a time of life where you think, brilliant, so my periods will stop and I won't need to buy any more products for that kind of thing. Oh no, keep buying them, because now you can't hang on to yourself when you sneeze and cough. So that's kind of annoying. Food intolerances that are new.
Yeah.
Bloating, reactions to food, that I didn't have before, that's brand new. Physical pain in places I've never had them before. And I'm scratching my head going, so is this something I should talk to a doctor about, or is this just menopause? I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. It's hard to know,
Very
isn't it? Yeah.
confusing, and I'm not really a big worrier, but when a lot's going on all at the same time, it sort of stacks, doesn't it?
So what did that do to your ADHD symptoms then? So all that physical stuff coming on top of just generally trying to cope, did it have any impacts on your ADHD?
Yeah, it meant the masking I was doing wasn't as effective.
Right.
So then I was more loud and exuberant and excitable, or very, very quiet. I was asking questions, perhaps my timing wasn't great, or I was vomiting ideas, which is a thing I do sometimes when I get a bit excited. Instead of that restraint that I had learned before, it's like, if I'm hot and there's other things going on, my mask's hard to keep in place.
Yeah.
So
I guess if you think about organizations and leaders having neurodiverse colleagues in their teams, colleagues with ADHD, for example, what do you think would be helpful for those leaders to know?
it's the one size doesn't fit all, and assumptions will never ever work. So as much as you might go on a training course or watch a YouTube video or something like that, it's only a piece of the puzzle. And the individual that you talk to will hopefully be able to articulate what they need. And just remember, it's not what they need forever, it's what they need at the moment, which might change in a week or a month or a year. Because things are changing all the time. And they're not doing it to be difficult. They're not doing it to get an advantage or because they want special treatment. They're doing it because they want to be their very best selves at work. We all do, right? We want to thrive at work. So it's those reasonable adjustments, accommodations, and adaptations that you might afford anybody in your workforce so they can be the best they can be. And just keep it as an ongoing conversation.
So what I'm hearing from you is actually leaders need to understand their colleagues, whoever they are, right? And learn what do they need to be at their best. And I just totally relate to what you're saying. For me, that's the basis of good leadership, right? That we know our colleagues and know what's their normal, whatever normal is, because let's be honest, there is no such thing.
Totally. And you wouldn't reward everybody in the same way anymore, hopefully. If you are, don't do that anymore. You like, if you say I was going to reward you for doing a great piece of work, Mel, I would take time to find out, would you be blown away by a gigantic bunch of flowers and a bottle of champagne and a big thank you in front of everyone? Or would you be, I hope the whole world would just swallow me up, but that's the worst thing you could do to me. But actually, if you gave me a £50 Amazon voucher and an email from the boss telling me how brilliant I am, we're golden. Because that's how I like to be rewarded. In the same way, you wouldn't treat everyone else in your team the same way. People think it's fair, but it's not. Look at equity. Equity is so important. There's a great graphic someone did with people standing on boxes over a fence. And it's about making sure everybody can see, not everyone's got the same box.
Absolutely. You're speaking my language totally. And that takes work and it takes time and it takes that leader needs to invest in that relationship. So what about from the employee's perspective? What do you think would help colleagues who are trying to navigate, I guess, ADHD with menopause on top?
So as much as it's not our job to inform and educate people at work, because that should come from above, from HR, from the diversity, equity and inclusion space, we have to accept sometimes businesses aren't there yet. So I would encourage people to have those conversations, to put things in place like a neurodiversity policy that outlines reasonable adjustments they can ask for to start the conversation. Because some of those reasonable adjustments could well help anyone who's menopausal or introverted or have caring responsibilities or all sorts of things, because we're all dealing with different stuff at the moment and not everybody tells everyone at work what's going on. So that person who's perpetually late could be perpetually late because actually their car broke down and they're having to catch a bus, but they're too embarrassed to tell everyone they haven't got a car at the moment, you know, or they're looking after their mum who's really poorly and they've got to wait for the carer to come. You know, there's any number of reasons. So it's that if you're a colleague or a team member and you're noticing somebody struggling, always lead with kindness.
Well, I actually think that's a brilliant place to stop, unless there's anything else you want to share, Sam.
No, that's that. I'm happy with that too.
Is there any final words around, you know, what would you like to see happen in the workplace beyond what you've already shared?
I guess I just want people to talk about things a bit more. There's still a lot of taboo subjects,
Yes.
particularly in sit-down offices. I know there's lots of other types of businesses out there, but particularly in sit-down offices, there's lots of subjects that don't get discussed
Mm.
unless it's under their breath or, you know, in the quiet. When actually, if we brought it out in the open and we talked about it openly, the taboo falls away, the stigma falls away, the backstabbing falls away. So that communication piece is really important. Bring it up in a team brief.
Mm.
You can bring it up in general terms. You don't have to single people out and go, well, Sam's told me she's on the menopause, so I think we should talk about menopause at team brief today, right? You know, I'm not talking about that.
But
But you could
yeah,
introduce it.
it is true though. I mean, at the end of the day, I often get people say to me, well, everybody's talking about the menopause. And I'm like, are they though? Are they really? It can feel for a colleague going through it that it feels quite vulnerable, I think, you know.
Hmm.
And actually, as you've already said, leaders need to create the culture where it feels psychologically safe to talk about this stuff, whether it is menopause, ADHD, the combination of the two. Do I feel like I'm supported and in a safe place to do that? And that takes quite a lot of work, I think, from the leader's perspective.
It does, and being very inclusive of men as well,
Oh,
because you know, men and women live together a lot of the time, work together. They have to, you know, have meetings together. There's all sorts of things that we have to collaborate on together. And yes, quite often we just want to get the job done, and it's annoying when someone's not on their A game. But you know what? All of us have moments where we're not on our A game.
yeah, yeah.
So having those little stories, those little vignettes to help people relate to that, you know, do you remember when? That's a great way of starting a little story when you're trying to help people understand what it might be like if they can't quite imagine it themselves. You know, have you ever felt really under the weather with flu and you just wanted someone to look after you? Nearly everyone's had that experience, right? So that's a great leveler. And then you can say, well, imagine if that's happening to you every month, only
Yeah.
you still have to come to work because you're not ill.
No. Okay, so what I take away from this chat is we've all got our own piece to do to keep talking, keep sharing, and so that we can build that empathy, right? Because actually, if we've never been through something, how can we relate to it? Um, so well,
Yeah.
thanks, Sam. We could talk for hours. I know that. But thanks for giving us a little window and insight into your experience. I really appreciate it, and hopefully I'll speak to you soon.
Well,
Thanks,
thanks
Sam.
for asking me to talk to you. I've had a great time.